Welcome back, everyone. Quickly, announcements first. Please do not forget to submit your assignment. Assignment 5, the first print is due tonight, so you still have some hours to submit. Remember, it's the first print. It's up to you. What do you complete in the first sprint? You decide which elements were a priority or which one do you finish. Assuming that the ones that are not finished, you move to the sprint number 2. However, something that we're going to review is somehow you balance sprint 1 and sprint 2, right? It's not like sprint 1, nothing, and suddenly sprint 2 have everything. You're following the process, right? Again, can you hear me? I am reading some questions about it. Okay, so we're fine. Good. So please do not forget to submit, and you need to submit these elements. They are on Canvas. They are in the previous lecture slides. So you know what to submit, what we're expecting. Submit that tonight. You have time. Also, next lecture, please remember, next lecture is your midterm. So again, we are not going to have a lecture. You do not need to use Zoom. Next lecture, we do not have a meeting here. The only thing that you need to do March 11 is go to Canvas, open your exam, complete your exam. If you finish in 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, 1 hour, you finish the exam, you are done. See you next week. So no lecture next Tuesday. So use your exam on Canvas, and you need the lockdown browser. Please, if you are not in Arizona, if you are in any other part of the planet, just be aware that your exam is Arizona time. Hopefully this time I am not going to have emails from anyone telling me that you forgot or you mix the timing or whatever. So please be sure to review Arizona time. That is the time in which your exam is going to be enabled, and the exam close at that time, no exceptions. So put that in your schedule, your alarm, wherever. Be sure to do your exam during the lecture time. Okay, so remember, I just sent an email to the people that have not submitted the sample exam. I am sure that most of you have used this software before, the lockdown browser. Probably you have used the software in the same computer that you're going to use now to do your exam. But please, open the sample exam, submit the sample exam, be sure that it's working. You do not have an idea of how many people send emails during the exams telling me my computer was working yesterday, but today it's not working, or it worked in the exam previous week, but not this week. So in 1 minute, 30 seconds, just go to the link, do the exam, be sure that it's going to open, work, your camera, your internet, whatever. Check your systems, please. So I just sent an email, and I am going to be sending emails in the following days, trying to remind you that you need to submit the sample exam to be sure that you're going to be able to present your exam March 11. So if you haven't done this, please submit so you stop receiving emails from Canvas about it. The day of the exam, this is going to be your link, midterm. Remember, the process basically is you need a camera. If for any reason your camera is not working or you need a computer with a camera, as far as I understand, the library is helping with computer access or borrowing your cameras if for any reason you do not have one. So you can do your research, and you can maybe ask a friend if you need a computer for that day. Check the space that you're going to use. either ask your roommates for a space during 1 hour to do your exam. Remember, you cannot talk during the exam. You can be flagged as suspicious, or you can use any room in the campus. The library is open. So think about in which place you're going to be, the internet, no interruptions, and so on. And be sure to have your ID with you. Remember, the system is going to ask you for the camera. Once the system have access to the camera, one of the things that is going to happen is it's going to take a picture of you, but also it's going to ask for your ID. It's going to ask you to show the ID. So it's going to take a picture of your ID, anything, ASU ID, your passport, your driver license, whatever. My recommendation, have your ID with you, maybe in your desk, so you can quickly show the ID, be done with the process, and just continue, move forward to start the exam as soon as possible. I am considering that you can use 15 minutes here. It's a lot. If you have 60 minutes to the exam, that is fine. More or less, as I mentioned before, 20 questions, so 3 minutes per question. 60 minutes is a good amount of time to finish, but if you can do this process in less than 50 minutes, and I am sure that you can do it in 5 minutes maybe, you could have 10 minutes extra to review or to work in the open questions, to do the programming thing. So the faster you can complete the process, the better. Yeah, it should be on Canvas. Regarding the guidelines, it should be on Canvas. If not, I can review at the end of the lecture, so to be sure that you have access to the document. I am asking you for the sprint backlog. The question about the project, I am asking you for the sprint backlog. I am asking you for the things that you complete, because basically I need to, what I am going to do is to compare what you list in the sprint backlog, things that you complete, with your bull-down chart. So like, if the bull-down chart makes sense, next time you're going to submit the same. So we're going to review the balance between the sprint backlog 1 and the sprint backlog 2. And well, how did you follow the process? Yeah, the sprint backlog. Okay, so have your ID. Also, remember, you need to do your environment check. Either just consider that you need to move your laptop, or if you have a camera, you're going to need to move the camera. Some people ask me about what happens if I have a desktop and the camera is on the screen and it's a big screen. I do not have an answer for that. Maybe you want to connect an external camera that is easy to move, but just remember, the system is going to ask you for showing your environment, showing your room and your desk. So you should be able to move the camera down and maybe rotate or something. Consider that. Hopefully you have done this in other classes, so it's not the first time. But if not, please consider all those things. Finally, just remember, you can use scratch paper. Scratch paper is okay. I am not going to ask you to do anything on the paper that you need to submit. You do not need to do a diagram or some kind of answer on paper that later you need to take a picture and send to me. That is not going to happen. The paper is used for you if you think that you need paper to put your ideas in some kind of order. If you like to have the pencil and annotate things, but it is not mandatory to have paper. You do not need the paper. But if you want, you can have it. Just be sure that if you are going to have paper on your desktop, please not recycle paper, empty paper, and show the paper at the beginning when you do the environment checking. When you do the environment checking, when you show your desktop and the paper is there, it's a good idea to show the paper to the camera that is empty. There are no notes there or something suspicious. And again, in your desktop, no laptop, other computer, I mean, not cellular phone or electronic devices. And please do not cover your ears. you cannot be listening music. If that is the case, you cannot do that. The system is going to flag you suspicious, because the idea is that you could be talking and listening someone else, I don't know, sharing you the answers or whatever. Again, I am not the one reviewing that, but the thing is not allowed for you to have something in your ears. So avoid be flagged as suspicious. No music. Some people ask me, I need the headphones because at the beginning, when I am doing the check-in, the system is asking me to have access to the audio. If you need if the only device that you have to provide audio, your microphone, is also your headphones, you can use it at the beginning of the exam, but as soon as you are on the exam, you can remove and put them on the desktop. During the exam, nothing covering your ears, please. So closed book, remember, the quizzes are open book. Yes, the quizzes, but for the exam, nothing is allowed. Nothing, no book, no note, slides. You cannot open any other tab in the browser. The idea is that the lockdown browser is not going to allow you that, but you cannot either open a browser or email or whatever in other devices or other screens. Please avoid anything that could be flagged as suspicious of you doing that kind of stuff. So nothing is allowed, and be sure to show that your environment is okay. What is the syllabus for the midterm? The topic, you mean? I am going to mention that in the following slides. Yeah, when I say white paper, I mean empty paper. It do not need to be white. My point is nothing printed or nothing that you write before. It's just paper that is empty. You show to the camera that is just paper with nothing printed or notes. But yes, you can use paper with lines or squares or white. It's fine. Yeah, thank you for asking. Good. So moving forward, this is something that we discussed before. I want to insist. Hopefully, everyone is going to be fine with the exam. Now, I am going to start first with questions. Test yourselves, questions that could be in your exam, and I want to be sure that you are able to answer. And then I am going to give you a list of topics that I recommend you to review, the topics that are going to be on your exam. So testing yourself, please, first, just in case I run out of time. Question number one, if I show you this class diagram, and I am using your assignment just because you just finished or are almost finishing with the first sprint, what do you think about this class diagram? I removed the methods and I removed the variables because what I want to review is the relationship between classes. So just to be able to put everything in one slide, I removed the methods, I removed the variables. My question is all about relationships. What do you think about this class diagram that represents your project talking about the relationships? Okay, hopefully we agree, and I agree with the people in the chat. There are a lot of opportunities for improving here. There are a lot of errors here, and this can be a multiple choice question. Multiple choice questions for some of you is this diagram, multiple choice, one list of errors, and you need to select all the errors that apply. That is one type of question. A second type of question is an open question. An open question is the diagram and use a square, a text area. Please tell me what can be done with this diagram. Open, not for selection, but for you to describe what is wrong. Again, the relationships. One thing that you notice, very, very important, I can start with that. The main is not connected with anything else. Error number one, we talk about it. If you have a class diagram, somehow the classes are, all of them, connected. If you have a class that is not connected with the others, number one, that class is not needed, or we're talking about two different systems. The worst case scenario, like this one, the main is disconnected, so the main is doing nothing. Again, assuming that that class is the one that have the public static void main. Big error, number one. Another one, listeners, good. Talking about the listeners, what do you think about this mouse listener? Now you know what do you need to do for the drag and drop. What do you think about this mouse listener being used? There is a realization there, right? And there is a realization with the workspace, you know, the tab in which you are working. The dot is the small square inside of the icons, you know, and also something called a vertical bar. Do we need the mouse listener connected with 3 classes? Okay, and I am going to take the answer in the chat. No, we do not need that. And hopefully everyone agree with that. And moreover, hopefully you understand why. Because it's not only, no, we do not need that because I told you that in a lecture. Is, do we understand why? What is the reason because we do not need 3 classes connected with the listener? In this particular scenario, the mouse listener. The classes that implement the listeners are the classes that trigger the events, correct? So which is the event? Something with the mouse. Can we agree that whatever you do with the mouse should be the concern of hopefully 1 class? Worst case scenario, 2 classes, but 3 classes? I agree with your answers in the chat. Again, hopefully everyone is agree with that. Here we can have a discussion about which one is better. The 3 options could be possible. Somehow you can figure out a program in which you can make this work with the connection in any of the classes. One solution better than the others, but somehow you can make it work with any of the classes. The point is, choose one, make it work. Maybe 2. But when you have all these classes, 3 or more, and all of them concerned with the mouse, probably the concerns are not separated. Remember that is one of the principles. So this is wrong, this is wrong, these connections here are wrong, and something else. I agree with your answers in the chat. And again, if someone have a question, I am happy to answer, but what you are describing in the chat, that is the point. The only thing that I can add to that, be careful with these reflective relationships. I could agree with that. It's a tricky question. You need different icons. I described different of them. Whether or not you use inheritance, yeah, you can avoid the inheritance. You can decorate them. Use add the input and output that you need. You can create a generic icon, or you can use inheritance. Three different options. What you use, again, as far as you make it work with one of those three, we haven't reviewed yet about which one of those three is the better. So far, one of the three in your submission could be okay. We need to review them, and I expect to use your submission to show you solution with inheritance, solution with decoration, solution with one icon, and then we can talk about the specific. But yes, I could agree with that in the chat regarding this is kind of suspicious, depending on the code. Okay, so one thing that I am going to ask you during the exam, for sure, I am going to show you class diagrams, and in the class diagram, I am going to ask you questions. So besides the fact that you need to be able to identify errors, you need to be able to understand the class diagram. You need to be able to understand the relationship that I am showing you, whether they are inheritance, association, composition, aggregation, and whether or not they are a good solution in terms of the topics that we reviewed in the previous lecture, dependency injection, separation of concerns, and so on. One thing, very important thing, I will put here an asterisk and tell you an important topic that I highly recommend you to review. Understand class diagrams and understand when to use or not a particular relationship. Which picture or which lines or which combination of lines suggests that there could be a problem, like you told me during the chat. It's like, oh, it looked like there is a problem here. It looked like there is a problem here. It looked like we can do better here. It looked like this is suspicious. Those things that you did, at least the people in the chat, those things that you did is exactly what probably you will need to do in a couple of questions during your exam. So everyone, please review this. Good. Now, moving forward, classes, the diagrams versus the source code. That is another set of questions that you're going to have. I am going to show you either the class diagram, as I described before, or the source code and ask you about the class diagram, or I am going to show you both, and I am going to ask about the principles. The picture in the slide is correct, yes or no? And that is a question in your exam. Yes or no? No partial credits used? Yes, no, full points. What do you think? I fully agree with the no. May I ask why not? Two reasons because I show you this. Reason number one, and you identify that source code and diagram should match. We have repeated this several times. The blueprint, in this case for the software, the class diagram, is the graphical representation of the final product. They should match. So if there are elements that are in one or in the other, but not in both, something is wrong. Again, something that I ask you to review is, please be sure that for any source code that you have in your project, in my slides, whatever, you can imagine what is the class diagram for that code. And there is one and only one correct answer. And you know the process to get for the class diagram. Or the opposite. This class diagram, I can ask you for the source code of whatever combination of classes. I am not going to ask you for all of them. The open questions, more or less, worst case scenario, you're going to be writing 20 lines of code, including lines with only the curly brackets. So it's not going to be an exam too long or that you need to write very, very fast. It's 20 lines, 10 lines, 15 lines, depending of how do you split the lines. So that is important. But second, I need you to remember the principles for clean coding. And we talk about this, dry and kiss. Did you notice the problem here? A big problem. Here, this is a submission for a classmate of you several years ago, but the point is, this class was supposed to be a singleton. If you're familiar with the singleton, you can identify that in the private constructor and the instance that is a variable. Okay, for some reason, a singleton. But then we have this bunch of constants. And then we have these methods, getter for the constants. What do you do if you have constants? What is the rule, quotation mark, for the constants? Do you have getters for the constant? You have this constant close bracket, and then you have this get close bracket. Is something that we do? Is something that is in the guidelines? Okay, that is the rule. And again, I agree with the chat. If you have constants, you make them static, even public. Remember the colors, the constants of the math class? What happened with the constants in Java in general? Uppercase, that is fine. Final, that is fine. You make them static, but also you make them public. You do not have getters for constants, because if you put getters for constants, we have an issue with this. Okay, guys, can you hear me? Yes, perfect. Good. So, number one, the static, the public also, because they are constants. Any other thing that you can figure out in order to make this source code smaller? An enumeration, yes. Another option if we do not want or we don't know about enumerations. Option number two, similar to enumeration. Enumeration is a good idea. Another similar one, the array. So those kind of questions. Source code. If I have this group of constants and they are strings, I think the easy thing to do, number one, is to create an array of strings. And then you can have, if you do not want to have that as a constant, maybe like in some of your projects, you need to compare with a group of words. You can have the constant, the array with all the strings, and then if you need to access the array, you can have getters or setters with the parameter that is the index of the word, or to search the word, whatever. But this use one method getter, one method setter, and one array. 3 lines following this format instead of all this. Enumeration is probably a better idea. Public, static, again, depending of your problem, depending of the circumstance, but all these options that you mentioned, and you are aware of them, are better by far than what I am showing you on the screen. And I am not talking yet about the singleton pattern. That is another issue, but something like the thing on the screen, something like this code is not dry, not case, and is another topic that I want you to review for the exam. Questions that you are going to have on the exam is similar to this. The code, good or not? And the question is all about the coding principles. Again, is depending on your problem, depending on what you're doing. If you have an array with a bunch of strings, I am doing this project with another class, you have an array and this array is keywords. The only thing that you do is send us a parameter string, and inside of the method, what we are doing is searching for that string inside of a data structure. That could be a list or a hash table or whatever. And the only thing that you get back is if that word exists or not in your particular array of keywords. Obviously, the keywords are constant. There are not going to be more or less keywords. So just to give you an example, again, my point here is the source code. If you need methods, two methods, one setter, one getter, whatever, and the data structure, 1, 2, 3 lines, less than what you have here, less than what I am showing you here. Or if you do not need that, use your constants, and your constants, public, static, final. Again, use the lines that correspond to whatever number of constants you have, depending on your problem. But this solution, no matter what is the problem, this solution is not good. Collection is a good idea. Good. Okay, so number 2. Number 3. What about your project? For your project, hopefully by now you are aware of a good class diagram. I showed you something that is a class diagram with errors. What about the class diagram for the solution that you are submitting tonight? Looks like this draft. It's just a picture. Your class diagram looks maybe like this. Can you understand this one? Can you identify here key ideas for your project? Can you identify what is missing? For instance, moving forward, number 1, it's a good idea to have inheritance between JFrame and the class in which you have the main method. Inheritance, it is better than composition, yes or no? Question in your exam. Yes. Why? I am not going to ask you why, not in the same question, but true, false. And I need to be sure that you can answer yes or no, because you have the background of why. We have discussed that in previous lectures. The worst case scenario, the option, the relationship that provide very strong coupling is composition. Usually you want to avoid composition. If I give you the option between connecting main and JFrame with inheritance or with composition, hopefully we all can agree that whatever you use is better than the composition for the coupling. In particular, with the JFrame, something that we review, inheritance is a good idea. Not only for the coding, but it's kind of documentation inside of the product. Because you look to the diagram and you look this connection between frame and main, and you know that that is the point in which your application starts. You know that, okay, this guy is going to be a graphical user interface because the inheritance is a child of the frame. And because it's a child of the frame, that guy is going to be the center of the application. What do you think about the relationships? Association between the class main, that is a child of frame, and classes like menu bar, menu item. Could it work? Can I use association between those classes? Yes or no? Is a good option? Yes or no? Again, I agree with the people in the chat. Can it work? Yes, something that you have reviewed, something that we have done before is you can create menu items, menu bars inside of the constructor and add the elements to the main frame or to a panel. And you do not need to have them as a globals. And if you do not need them as a globals, you do not need the diamonds. You do not need the aggregation or the composition. Just with association, you can make the application work. And association is better in terms of the coupling than aggregation composition. So yeah, I think this can work. This can work. It is not bad. I mean, the question in the chat, it could be bad to do that, not necessarily, it depending of the application. For instance, what happens if you have an application and for that application you have two versions? You have the version that is graphic, the version that have a frame with graphical elements, and for some reason you have a second version that is text-based. A second version in which you can run the same application and maybe all the menu options are in the console and you can get access to the data in the console and so on. So there are two versions and you have this main and somehow you're going to pass a parameter to the main in order to select one option or the other. In that scenario, what you have is a main that is not a child of JFrame because the main is not graphic. And then that main is the one that somehow is going to receive the parameter or ask you or whatever. And that main is going to select whether or not to create an object that is going to be from another class. And that other class is the one that is going to be inheriting from frame. So that other class is the beginning of the graphical user interface, or continue, or create another object that is not graphic at all. So it's depending of the context. But if you are doing an application that is 100% graphic, like my example with your homework, there is no reason for having one class that the only thing that is going to do is to create an object of another class that is the graphic. Because this class is kind of something that I can eliminate. It's kind of, you are doing nothing. So in that scenario, only graphic, I will say, eliminate this class, the one that is only creating the object, and this guy can create the object. That is basically what we're doing in this main. The main use create the object from the same class, set visible, set size, and so on. And the constructor is creating the graphic, creating all the connections. That could be my answer. But okay, so far, do we understand what is this relationship here? Listener, can I ask you in your exam, what relationship you can use between a listener and a class? And can I put there generalization, specialization, realization, aggregation, composition, whatever? And hopefully you can, realization. Is the only one? Can we use other relationships between something that is an interface and something that is a class? If I have an interface and I have a class, which relationship can be used between them? Can I connect, for instance, composition or aggregation, whatever, from a class to an interface? In your exam, I give you the class diagram, something like this. I have a class, I have a diamond, I have a connection, and I have an interface in the opposite side. I am going to put the role of interface there, the stereotype, so you will know that it's an interface. Can I have that relationship between a class and an interface? Do you remember the source code? Yes. I mean, do you remember what is the meaning of the diamond in the source code? Do you remember what is going to happen if you try to transform this to source code? Basically, I'm asking you if you can have a class C, and that class C can have inside a variable from the type, whatever is the interface. Yes, agree with the chat. This is because polymorphic behavior. Do you remember? This interface can be the parent of whatever. And you can have here an object from the interface. You cannot do the new equal new I. And maybe that is the tricky part. You cannot do the equal new to whatever. but the data type of the variable can be that one. And therefore, there is that relationship. Obviously, what about something like this association? Can I call a method, have this relationship of calling a method from the class to the interface? Yes or no? Similar answer that before, right? Polymorphic behavior. You can do it. So what about the opposite? What about I give you the same class diagram, but now with a line that go point to the other side? Correct or not? Agree with the chat again. Yeah, that is not correct. Why is not correct? Well, what do you need to do that call? It's an interface. What is an interface? Can you create an object from the other class and call the method, etc., in the interface? And the answer is, in the interfaces, I cannot have source code. And if I do not have source code, then how I can call a method? So that kind of tricky questions in order to review your understanding of the class diagram. Again, when you saw a class diagram, my goal is that you think about the source code. It is possible to do the source code for this. It's going to compile the source code for this. You are asking me to call a method from an interface, and well, you have experience as a programmer. You know the answer. So agree with the chat. Good? Similar questions. I have two class diagrams below. I already mentioned this before, but again, diagram A, diagram B. According with what we have reviewed, which is better? Thank you, B. Why? That should be a reason. Yeah, that is. Separation of concerns, and we complement with dependency injection. We already reviewed the relationship, but yeah, dependency injection, separation of concerns. Do we understand that this diagram and this diagram, they have particular source code? Can we agree that this source code is going to be the diagram A or the diagram B? Okay. Easy. Agree with the chat again. So did you notice the type of questions that you're going to have? It's like you're answering in less than a minute. Well, the people in the chat, in less than a minute, you have the answer. And hopefully you are not guessing. You have the answer because you have the background of that is the reason. This is the only possible answers. So again, in the exam, average 20 questions, average 60 minutes, 3 minutes per question. You have a good amount of time to review, think about it, answer, and maybe go back and forward and review. So I am confident that you can perform well in the exam. Just read carefully the question, be sure that you understand what is being asked, and be careful with what you select. That's it. So yeah, something like this. Now, question, what about the class diagram for the source code here? Is any of the diagrams below or a different one? Okay, can we agree if I ask you for the class diagram of this source code and I give you A, B, and another one, the option is C. Can we agree that this one is not this one? Why? What do we need for the diamonds? We need these guys outside, right? We need here variables, global variables. So again, something for you to remember, the meaning of the diamonds, the black and the white in general. Good. Now, the question in the chat regarding the interfaces. Remember, when you send up parameters, when you have a method, in the interfaces you can have method, yes. Those methods can receive parameters, yes. But remember, the relationship is, number one, with the diamonds, if you have the variables as an attribute. That is not the case with the interface. Second, the association, basically because you call a method. So yes, you are going to have a parameter. Parameters are local variables. Good. There is nothing to show for a local variable. There is nothing to add. We add diamonds for the global variables. We do not have that. We add the arrow for some kind of dependency, some kind of use of the other class, and that basically means for calling a method. The only reason because we create an object, think about it, the only reason because we create an object inside of a method, the only reason because we create a reference to an object in another class as a local variable is because we're going to use that object. And using that object is calling a method. There is no other thing that we can do. So that calling the method is the use. That calling the method is the association that we usually represent in our pictures. So even though the interfaces of a class can have parameters of anything, the interface is not going to use the parameters. So no need to put any particular connection. The left one. Black diamonds, something that I need to add here. For instance, if I do something like one panel X, and then I put here X, and this is the constructor. Just by adding that, the variable outside, and this is a constructor, and it's the default constructor, and then I have the new here. So because it's the default constructor, I do not have any other in this particular example, that constructor is going to be executed. And therefore I have the variable is global. Just with the variable global, I have the diamond. And because of the constructor and because of the new, I have the black diamond. So that could create this relationship with the black diamond, adding this and this. Yeah. But without having that information, I do not know if the option here is like for this one, the two, if I have the data type here, if I have the type there with the variable, so this one is local. My relationship with this one is without the diamond. Yeah, I put these dots here and these dots here just to show you this one and this one. So I keep like open the slide to play with where is the declaration. So yeah. In the exam, obviously, it's going to be more clear. I mean, in the exam, I am not going to put use dots. Worst case scenario, I put a comment, and in the comment, I give you here, there are these variables declared of this data type or whatever. I give you instructions that are more clear. For the slide, my goal is to explain both, so I have these empty spaces to complete with you. Yeah, don't worry. You could have tricky questions, but not this level of tricky. Good? Okay, more. review. Topics that I recommend you to check. What I reviewed with you was more about the last topics, class diagrams, things in which you need to translate from design to coding, remember Brian keys, practical things, because those are going to be the questions or the topics that are related with the open questions. And the open questions are the ones that are going to receive more points, obviously, need more knowledge, and you need to work more with them. Now, talking about the topics that are connected, most of them with multiple choice questions, theoretical questions. One topic in particular is connected with open questions too, but let me tell you. Disclaimer, I am not going to mention all the topics. Please, you need to review the lectures from the lecture 2 until this one. So anything from the 2 to this one can be in your exam. I cannot mention everything here, but just want to mention those topics that, number one, are the ones that are connected with more questions. So hopefully you perform better if you review these topics, even though maybe you do not get 100, but at least you get 70, 80, I do not know. My recommendation to study if you need to select a subset of topics. But again, this is not comprehensive. Please, you need to review all the lectures. So, topics, a big summary in 2 slides. Number one, you need to review everything about the background of the Agile methodology. Agile, we need to understand the difference between Agile and plan-based. Moreover, we need to understand when Agile is useful, is not for every single project. There are particular cases. We talk a little bit about that, and I recommend you to review Somerville chapter 2 and chapter 3 in case of you are not familiar with this. We covered this the first week, our first 2 lectures, or first and second week, the first lecture. If you understand what I am talking about, what is Agile, what is the difference between Agile and plan-based, in which projects Agile can be used, and so on, you are good to go. Is basically prerequisites. I am asking you that you need to have these prerequisites. You need to have this knowledge about what is the meaning of Agile and in which cases Agile work. We reviewed this quickly. However, I assume that you have the knowledge, and I give you this reference during the lectures, and I am giving you the reference again, just in case that you need to review this. Again, it's up to you, depending on your background. But background about Agile, important for you to review. Multiple choice questions. The simple one, what is Agile? And several options. You need to select those that apply, 1 or more. So be ready for that. What is Agile? When Agile work? In which kind of project? The Agile Manifesto. I am going to give you more details about the Agile Manifesto, but I am talking about theoretical background. Next, something that we talk a lot, and this is a topic for open questions also. Open questions related with what is a requirement, what is not a requirement. And connected with this, what is a story, what is not a story. Epics versus stories. You're going to have examples of good stories and bad stories. And I am going to ask you which of the following is a story. I am going to show you some examples, but please, after the class diagrams and after these 3 Brian keys, the third topic that I highly recommend you to review, be sure to understand requirements and stories. Be sure to be able to identify a good story. Several of your assignments have been around that. A lot of feedback, a lot of lectures about it, a lot of examples. You're going to have questions in your exam about it. Please be sure to review it. Something that you would like to review, talking about the theoretical background, the Burdon chart, the roles, the ceremonies, the process of the Agile. We reviewed this in one particular lecture, all the different roles, all the different process, the pictures that you have in the slides, but just in case, again, Somerville chapter 3 and 4 is something that you would like to read if you didn't have the background before starting with this class. Because again, we review that quickly, assuming that you have some background. If not, Somerville. 2 and 3 for the concepts, 3 and 4 for the particularities about requirements and the Agile process. The Agile principles, I am going to show you the principles in the next slide, so don't worry, but if you need to review them in detail, the second book, the Rubin, chapter 3 is one that you would like to read. Again, you do not need to read the books. If you can read my slides, or if you were in the lecture and everything that we reviewed was clear, you are ready for the exam. All the questions in the exam is something that we review during a lecture. But if you want or need to do a fuller research to read more, I am sharing with you which chapters are we covering. People factors, we're going to talk about it. You're going to have questions about it. People factors in Agile. We have a lecture about it. Obviously, connected with that, we're going to have questions like the one that I mentioned before, clean coding and the clean principles. We have a couple of lectures about it. Martin chapter 1 is something that you would like to read. Product backlog items, the different items in a product backlog, including user stories and epics, the difference between them, as I mentioned before, the connection between those and requirements, in particular, functional and non-functional. Key. Storyboarding, being able to identify the epics and the stories from a story that I share with you. I share with you the Pac-Man story, and I ask you for the stories or for the product backlog to do the Pac-Man. I share with you this game, and I share with you the rules and all the specification, even the implementation online. And I ask you for the stories. One question that you could have is the description of a project, the description of a piece of software, and the question is going to be open for you. Give me some stories for this particular scenario. Give me some stories for, and we can put there Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, Canvas, quizzes online, the name of a video game, whatever. Be sure to be able to create stories, good stories. And talking about good stories, they invest. If I ask you for a story in an open question, be sure to review for whatever stories you put there, 5, 10, that all of them cover the invest principles. I could ask you for a particular principle to tell me how you are checking that in the story, a particular specific question, but in general, one way that you can be sure that your answer is correct, and again, it's an open question, 10 points, 15 points for those lines, you do not want to miss those points. Review your stories applying this. Think about that sentence that you are including there that is following those principles. Remember, not because you're following the template as I want something, that is a story. Not because you're following the template, your answer is going to be correct. Remember that you're going to have open questions with this, and those are usually the questions in which most students lost points because the stories are not correct. So review that. You are going to have time. Both scenarios are possible. There are questions in which I am asking you only for the stories because I am asking you for 5 to 10 stories, depending on the problem. And there are other questions in which I ask you for one story, but I ask you for everything, like the acceptance criteria. So both questions, different scenarios. Good. my answer is be prepared to write an acceptance criteria if you are asked for. Obviously, if I am asking for 10 stories, I am not going to ask you for writing 10 stories with all of them acceptance criteria. Again, it's not going to be, the questions are not going to be that long. So one or the other. Deep, planning poker, grooming, product backlog. If you remember the concept and you can connect them, you are good to go. Sprints, characteristic of a sprint, sprint planning, sprint backlog. And hopefully you can differentiate those two. This one was lecture, this was another lecture. Be prepared to answer questions about what are those concepts, what is planning poker, what is grooming, what is the sprint backlog, what is the difference of the sprint backlog and the product backlog. Obviously, all those questions are multiple choice. So basically, you need to have the knowledge about what is the difference, and you be prepared to select the correct multiple choice answer that match with the explanation that you already know. Most of these two, in terms of questions, multiple choice and asking you about yes, no, differences, concepts, definitions. So review them. These two, we already mentioned practice, source code, and we're going to ask you to, this is keys or not, this is dry or not. And probably also you're going to have a question that is, what is keys? And multiple choice with different definitions. So hopefully you remember the meaning of keys or the meaning of dry, or which of the following make a program more readable, which of the following increase readability, and those are going to be the principles that we already reviewed. So this is the summary of concepts that we are covering with the exam. Details of those topics, I just want to be sure, please remember the principles. And I give you the list there. Remember this list of principles in the Agile. Be sure to understand them and how they are connected. We reviewed that in one lecture. You can go back and review. You can use the marking. I think I put here this one. I didn't put the chapter, but that is the one that can cover that one also. Most important thing, where the people have more problems is with the guidelines. So for the guidelines, remember, I share with you the link with the Java guidelines. Review Java. Something that I didn't put here, but I am assuming that you can answer questions about it, is Java, in particular, questions including Java Swing and listeners. Again, I didn't put that in the list of topics, but however, we covered that before. We was talking about class diagrams, and we are talking about your projects. In your project, you have used this. So I am assuming that you know Java. If for any reason in the projects you are receiving help with the Java programming, whatever is happening there, please, in the exam, you need to be prepared to answer questions that are related with things that you did in your assignments. I am talking about understanding JFrame, JPanel, those items from Java Swing, and obviously the listeners. So questions about implementation of listeners with a class diagram, translate that to source code. I am assuming that you're familiar with that because you are using that in your project. So there are going to be questions about that, and there are going to be open questions. So, you know, the class diagram to the program, and the program is something that you need to write. So I am assuming that you're familiar. If not, for any reason, please review those topics in Java. Details, the Agile principles. Be sure to remember this Agile principle, the people factors, common errors with the people. We do not remember, we didn't review the people factors, yet we did. This picture in particular is a picture that we review in one particular lecture. And from this picture, we move forward to several different things. In particular, that was the connection with the technical things, the technical skills and the personal skills. Review that lecture if you do not remember what is the meaning of these people factors. Additional to that, invest Be sure to remember what is the meaning of each of the letters. Moreover, how to review each of the letters. If I give you one user story and I ask you, hey, this user story is okay according with any of this, the question is going to be yes or no. The point is you need to remember what is the meaning of the letter, or what is the meaning of valuable, what is the meaning of negotiable. This story is negotiable, yes or no. You need to remember what is the meaning of negotiable. What do you mean? One of the invest principles. So be sure to review this. In a similar way, I am going to move to this one. Common errors. Can we agree with me, hopefully, that all of these are examples of bad stories? All of these are examples of stories that have one way or another an error. And I am not going to go into the details, but you have the slides. Well, you're going to have the slides. Review these examples and be sure that you agree that all of them have errors. Moreover, if you can identify which is the error is connected with one of these letters, the better for you to review before the exam. But if you cannot identify the error in any of these stories, we can talk in office hours, you can send me an email, but these are examples of errors. These are examples of things that I can put in your exam, and the answer that I am expecting is, this is wrong because one of these letters or more than these letters. Product backlog items. Common mistake to forget that these guys, yes, are the stories, but more. Question in your exam, which are the 4 categories of product backlog items? It's going to be in several of your exams. Not all of them is a question from the pool, randomly selected, but several of you are going to have that question. Which are the 4 categories of product backlog items? This is the answer. So I just want to remind you the picture. Deep, similar to invest. Question in your exam, who is deep? The PBIs are deep. The backlog is deep. The stories are deep. Which one of those makes sense? Okay, I am going to go with the chat. B. We review deep as a characteristic of the product backlog. The characteristic for the stories are invest. The product backlog items are the things that you have inside of the product backlog. But the one that we're talking about, prioritized, estimated, emergent, in particular, this one is the full product backlog. So just remember that in your exam. Again, it's a common question in which there are people that make mistakes. Deep is for the product backlog. So this apply is like thinking about the list versus the objects inside of the list. And when we talk about sort, for instance, we sort the list or the array. Yeah, we are moving the objects, but the sorting process is the one that at the end is going to be sorted is the list. Hopefully that analogy helped. Even though the elements are the one moving, even though the elements are the ones that have a priority and an estimation, even though the elements are the ones that we are moving up and down, the one that is sorted, the one that is emergent in this case, or the one that is prioritized and estimated is the list. Well, in this case, the backlog. Again, my example is like the product backlog items are like the elements in the list. This is the product backlog, like the list. And this apply to the list, which means to all the elements in the list. So that is the reason. And I give you the reference if you want to review the book. Deep is a characteristic that we apply to the backlog. And obviously the backlog is this collection of items, but it's a feature that we apply to the repository, not to the elements individual. Tricky question, I know. That is the reason because I am mentioning this. For the items, in particular, the items that are features, you have this invest. So for each of the items, this small guy here, that could be a story, we review the invest. For the small guy, not for the product backlog, but for the full guy, for the full data structure, for all this set of things, that is when we review the deep. Because the priority of this one, for instance, is really makes sense when we compare with the priority of the other one. Yeah, each individual item have a priority, but this is all about how we handle the different priorities in the different items. So again, like the sorting in a list, we are sorting the elements, but the one that at the end is sorted is the full list. The only one true, if you're asking about true-false question, is B, just as you defined before in the chat. So if this is not a multiple choice like this one, but it's just a true-false with the individuals, the one that is true is B. The one that you need to select, if those are together, is B. B is the one that applies for D. Good. So, clean code principles, these ones, and that's it. The topics that you need to cover for your exam. Any question, guys? Okay, points. Number one, your exam are going to be around 20 questions, but I cannot tell you if you're going to have 19, 18, 21, or something like that, because the questions are randomly selected from a pool. That pool have questions that are 1 point, 3 points, 5 points, usually the multiple choice. So you can have questions that are multiple choice that are 1 point, 3 points, 5 points. Obviously, if randomly you have a lot of questions with 1 point, well, you're going to have several of them, or maybe use 1, 5, or a combination of 1, 3, and 5. It's random. So I do not think that you're going to have only 1 point or only 5 points. You're going to have a combination of them. For the open questions start with 5, 10, 15. I am not giving you the exact number of points because again, it's change with the difficulty, but 3 levels, 5, 10, 15. So the open questions are always a lot more, like the equivalent to 3 open. So that is more or less the points that you can expect in a question. So how many questions are you going to have? It's a combination of these 1, 3, 5, 5, 10, 15. So that is more or less what you are going to have. But again, around 20 questions in a combination of this one that I mentioned to make a total of 100. Question about the project. What information you need about save, load, and compile? Not sure. My recommendation for the project, you can check the video of the lecture in which I explain this. Compile is all about checking that the connections are correct. Which connections are correct? I think during the lecture, I described some examples, and there are several people that ask for particular cases. I remember drawing specific cases and telling you if the case was correct or not. Also, I remember giving you ideas about what was the meaning of the icons. So if you can take a look to that particular lecture, maybe that could answer the question. If not, please send me an email. You can share with me a particular case, and I can tell you if that is a correct compilation or not. Maybe that could help. Save and load is just like, imagine that this PowerPoint, when you click save, you are going to save everything that you have in the working area. So if you have 1 tab or 20 tabs, you're going to save all of them and whatever is inside. Just like in PowerPoint, you save your slides and everything that you put inside. And when you open, basically you are opening all the tabs that you had before with all the icons and the connections and everything that you had before. My best example could be PowerPoint. You have each tab is like 1 slide, and the icons are kind of any picture that you could put inside of PowerPoint, and the connection, any lines that you can put there. So save everything, load everything. The PBI, just to be clear, the PBI have a priority. The PBI have an estimation. The PBI is details, but this one, a PBI is emergent. That is the one that crash with the deep and the PBIs. So probably being like very, very strict, that could be the reason of the no. For compile, the only thing that you need to do in compile is to check that the connections are correct. That is the only thing. So your compile is going to report correct or not. That's it. I am not asking yet about an output that is the result of compiling. So just checking the connection, but that means that you need to understand which connections are correct, because basically what I am asking you to do is an algorithm that is going to implement that compilation, that review for the correct connections. Coding questions, as I explained before, a class diagram and give me the source code for the class diagram. That for sure is going to be there. So what I mentioned at the beginning is be sure that you understand a class diagram, be sure that you can transform a class diagram to source code. I can give you any class diagram. If you're familiar with, for instance, design patterns, I can give you the class diagram of a design pattern randomly. You do not need to know that it's a design pattern, but it's just a group of classes connected with some relationships, and I can ask you for the source code. Obviously, what we are going to review is that you put in the source code that correspond to the relationships in the class diagram. That is for sure going to be in your exam. As I mentioned before, something that you need to be ready to do is to use the classes panel, frame, listeners, because yeah, they can be involved in the class diagram, and therefore they can be involved in something that we ask you to program. Yes. Frame, panel, listeners, and probably some widgets, labels, bottoms. I am not going to go into details with complex things like JTables or things like that. So basic elements, basic widgets, and the frame and the panels with the listeners. I am going to upload the video. Usually it's 24 hours for the video to be posted. Yeah. Okay, guys, so I am going to stop here. Good luck with your exam. Remember, next lecture, use your exam. See you next week. Thank you.